The rain was a cold, vertical sheet, turning the forest floor into a slick black mud that sucked at the soles of Vesper's tactical boots. She ignored it, her focus entirely on the fine, luminescent mist she was spraying from a small, chrome-plated canister. The particles, charged with her own brand of investigative magic, swirled and coalesced, clinging to the faint, shimmering residue of blood that was invisible to the naked eye. A trail, like a ghostly river of silver, stretched away from the tangle of gnarled roots where the body had been found and disappeared into the deeper shadows of the pines. "Trail's fresh," she murmured, the words snatched away by the wind. Her partner, a burly werebadger named Griggs, who was more comfortable with a battering ram than a forensics kit, grunted in acknowledgement from his spot near the body bag. Vesper pushed a damp strand of platinum hair from her face, her eyes locked on the glowing path. The victim was a low-level courier, but the magical signature on the wounds was complicated. It spoke of high-level tampering, the kind of work that didn't happen in the back alleys of the city. This was organized, professional. A low, guttural snarl cut through the rain, and the hair on the back of Vesper's neck prickled. It wasn't a sound of aggression from an animal. It was a sound of warning, a territorial claim that vibrated in the very air, felt more than heard. The forest suddenly felt smaller, the space between the ancient trunks closing in. Two men emerged from the gloom, moving with predatory silence that defied their size. They were massive, clad in black tactical gear that strained against the broad planes of their shoulders. Their faces were impassive, but their eyes, a cold, glowing amber, were fixed on Vesper and Griggs with undisguised menace. They positioned themselves like bookends, cutting off the path back to the main road and forming a wall of muscle and hostility. Vesper's hand went to the sleek device clipped to her belt, her thumb resting on its activation pad. She didn't draw a weapon. The SRB's policy on escalating a potential werewolf encounter was famously written in blood. Instead, she straightened her spine, pushing her glasses higher up the bridge of her nose. The rain beaded on the lenses, but she didn't blink. Then he stepped between them. He was the most breathtakingly dangerous thing Vesper had ever seen. The rain seemed to avoid him, or maybe it was just that he commanded the space so completely that the elements themselves paid him deference. He wore an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, the dark fabric starkly at odds with the feral wilderness around him. His shoes, polished to a mirror shine, were impossibly clean as they sank slightly into the mud. His hair was a deep, dark umber, slicked back, but a few rebellious strands had fallen forward, framing a face that was all sharp, aristocratic lines and a hard, uncompromising jaw. His eyes were the color of burnished gold, and they held not a shred of humanity. He didn't look at Griggs. He didn't look at the body bag. His gaze was a physical weight that settled on Vesper and her alone. The air around him seemed to thicken, charged with an invisible, suffocating pressure that threatened to push her to her knees. "This is my territory," he said. His voice was a low, resonant baritone that was perfectly audible over the drumming rain. There was no anger in it, only a flat, absolute certainty. "You have intruded. The Obsidian Pack has jurisdiction here." "The Obsidian Pack's jurisdiction," Vesper began, her own voice quiet, controlled, "is over matters concerning your pack. This is a multi-species magical homicide with suspected genetic trafficking implications. It falls under the purview of the Supernatural Regulatory Bureau, Article 4, Section 3 of the Accord." She recited the code like a bored clerk reading a memo, even as the invisible pressure increased, becoming a dull ache in her temples. She could feel her own magic, a tight coil of energy in her chest, flaring in response. It was a primal recognition of a superior predator, and it took every ounce of her clinical discipline to suppress the instinct to run. A faint, unreadable flicker crossed his face. He took a step closer, and the smell of rain, wet earth, and expensive cologne was replaced by something else. It was a scent, wild and intoxicating, that spoke of ancient forests and moonlit hunts. It was the scent of pure, unadulterated power. It was his pheromones, and they were a weapon. He was trying to cow her, to force a submissive reaction. Vesper's nostrils flared, but it was from clinical disgust, not fear. "Your enforcers are currently standing in a fresh blood trail," she stated, her tone flat and factual. "And you are currently contaminating my crime scene with an obscene amount of alpha pheromones." She tilted her head, her eyes meeting his golden ones without a hint of wavering. "I can smell you from here. It's unprofessional." One of his dark eyebrows arched, a microscopic movement that was the first crack in his mask of stony authority. It wasn't anger. It was surprise. She didn't give him a chance to recover. In a single, fluid motion, she unclipped the device from her belt and raised it. It was a small, clear orb encased in a silver lattice, and it was already glowing with a soft white light. The magical recording device was a standard issue SRB tool, but the sight of it was often enough to give bureaucrats pause. "Mordecai X. Volkov," she said, her voice now carrying a new edge of official authority that cut through the rain and the suffocating aura. "As the senior investigating officer for the SRB's Homicide and High Crimes Division, I am formally registering this interaction. You and your associates are hereby charged with obstruction of justice in an official investigation. Additionally, you are in violation of Article 12, Section 1 of the Clean Scene Protocol, which explicitly prohibits any supernatural entity from actively weaponizing their biosignature, including but not limited to pheromones, within a designated crime scene perimeter." She watched the micro-expressions on his face. The surprise remained, but it was joined by something else. A flicker of dark, undeniable amusement. It wasn't a smile, not even close, but the corners of his mouth twitched, a barely perceptible movement that was entirely at odds with the brute force of his presence. He found her clinical, legalistic fearlessness fascinating. It was a challenge, a novel one, and he was savoring it. "The fine for a first offense is $50,000, Vesper continued, her voice never wavering. "Per individual, so that's $150 for the three of you. Do you have a credit card on file, or shall I send the invoice to the Obsidian Pack's treasury?" The massive enforcer on the left let out a low, growling breath of pure outrage. Vesper didn't so much as glance at him. Her gaze was locked on Mordecai. His eyes, which had been a cold, simmering gold, flashed crimson for a split second. It wasn't a display of anger meant to intimidate, but of something more primal, a flash of raw, predatory hunger. It was the look of a wolf who has just spotted the one creature in the forest that might actually give him a worthy chase. The air around them seemed to crackle, the pressure from his aura intensifying. Vesper's eyes narrowed. The pressure made her skin prickle, and her heart began to beat a faster, less clinical rhythm. But she did not flinch. She didn't take a step back. Instead, she held her ground, the glowing recording device a steady beacon in the dark between them. "I'm deducting another $10,000 for each second you continue to broadcast your territorial posturing within a 10-meter radius of the victim," she said, her voice sharp as a scalpel. "I'd advise you to step back. Now." For a long, charged moment, the only sound was the drumming of the rain on the leaves and the heavy breathing of the werewolf enforcers. Mordecai stood perfectly still, a statue carved from shadow and silk. The crimson faded from his eyes, leaving them the color of molten gold once more. The pressure in the air receded, as if a massive door had just been slowly closed. He took a step back, the movement unhurried, graceful. It was a show of compliance, but the sardonic amusement in his eyes said it was anything but. He looked past her, to the glowing blood trail she had just been following. "Your smuggler," he said, his voice calm once more. "He's running on pack lands. He's running on my land. This is no longer just your investigation agent." He paused, a clear prompt. "Vesper, she said, her tone clipped. Agent Vesper. She didn't offer a middle initial or a rank. Agent Vesper, he repeated, tasting her name. It sounded different on his lips, more intimate, more dangerous. You are a very small woman with a very loud voice and a very large arsenal of penalties. I admire that. He smiled then. A thin, predatory slash of a smile that didn't reach his eyes, but sent a jolt of ice down her spine nonetheless. But your paperwork and your fines are meaningless to me. He gestured with one elegant hand toward the two silent enforcers. This will not be settled by you issuing citations for contaminating a scene with my scent, no matter how effective a deterrent you believe it to be. The body was discovered by a scout of the Obsidian Pack. The trail you are following leads through the heart of my territory to the Obsidian's sole commercial district. You cannot take one more step without my permission. So, here is my proposition. He took another step forward. Closing the distance, she had just forced him to surrender. He was close enough now that she could see the faint, silvery scars that lined his jaw, the only evidence of a past violence that had not been kind to him. He was close enough that the scent of rain and cologne and that intoxicating primal musk filled her senses again, and the coil of her magic in her chest constricted in a way that was wholly alarming. You need my men to scout this territory for you. And I need your investigation to stop the one who's poaching on my land. It's a matter of mutual interest. His eyes roamed over her face, a predator appraising its prey. A temporary arrangement, a professional alliance. Vesper stared at him. Her mind was already working, calculating. The trail was leading north, through Obsidian territory, into the heart of a labyrinthine network of underground markets she had only ever been able to map from a distance. Without pack support, the investigation would be dead in the water. It would be a bureaucratic stalemate, and the murderers would slip away. A temporary arrangement, she repeated, her voice dripping with skepticism. Precisely. He held up his hand. From his inside jacket pocket, he produced a single metallic object. It was a bracelet, made of a dull gray metal that seemed to absorb the faint light of her recording device. It was featureless, save for a single glowing rune that was pulsating in a slow, steady rhythm. It was a symbiotic cuff. It required two people to activate, binding them together magically until a predetermined condition was met. You know what this is, he said, his golden eyes never leaving hers. A standard issue bond from the SRB's own armory. My team acquired one for our ongoing cooperation. Vesper felt her jaw tighten. This was insane. Bound to an AlphaKing. Voluntarily. It was the most reckless, idiotic move she could possibly make. Her gaze flicked from the cuff to his face. His expression was unreadable, but that hint of amused fascination was still there, lurking beneath the surface. He was enjoying this. He was enjoying her discomfort. You can't be serious, she said flatly. Deadly serious, Agent Vesper. His voice was low, intimate. This is the only way you see your smuggler. I don't negotiate. I dictate terms. He took her free hand in his, the grip firm, possessive, but not crushing. His skin was shockingly warm against her rain-chilled fingers. And this, he murmured, his thumb brushing across her knuckles, is my final offer. Vesper yanked her hand back as if his skin had burned her. I don't accept final offers from suspects at a crime scene. The cuff vanished back into his pocket with a casual flick of his wrist, and the amusement in his golden eyes deepened. He was already certain she'd have no choice. That certainty was the most infuriating thing about him. Before she could deliver another scathing citation, her earpiece crackled to life. Director Harlow's voice cut through the static, sharp and impatient. Vesper, status report. Now. She pressed a finger to the device, never breaking eye contact with Mordecai. I have a jurisdictional dispute, Director. Alpha Volkov and his enforcers are physically obstructing my investigation and contaminating the scene. I'm filing. Save the paperwork. Harlow's voice was clipped, strained. Get back to SRB headquarters immediately. Both of you. The Council of Elders is on a video link from the Obsidian compound. We're hashing this out in a conference room before this escalates into an incident report that has to go before the Accord Tribunal. Vesper opened her mouth to protest, but Mordecai was already moving. He turned on his heel with fluid grace, gesturing for his enforcers to fall in line. You heard the director, Agent Vesper. My car or yours? I'd recommend mine. It has heated seats. She watched him walk away, his tailored suit a dark slash against the rain-soaked forest, and felt a cold fury settle into her bones. This was not how investigations worked. This was politics, and politics was the one thing her meticulously ordered world could never fully contain. 20 minutes later, she was standing in SRB headquarters, her tactical gear still dripping rainwater onto the polished concrete floor. The conference room was a sterile box of white walls and harsh fluorescent lighting, a deliberate contrast to the feral wilderness she'd just left behind. Mordecai sat at the far end of the massive table, his jacket now draped over the back of his chair, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with lean muscle. He looked like a panther that had wandered into a veterinary clinic, completely out of place, utterly unbothered. The wall screen flickered to life, displaying two separate video feeds. On the left, Director Harlow's pinched face filled the frame, her steel gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. On the right, three ancient werewolves stared out with rheumy eyes and expressions of granite disapproval. The Obsidian Pack Elders. They wore ceremonial robes embroidered with silver thread, and their collective presence was a cold weight, even through the screen. This is unacceptable, Harlow began, her voice carrying that particular tone of bureaucratic rage that could strip paint. A body on the border of Obsidian territory, a trail leading into the commercial district. And now my best investigator is filing obstruction charges against the AlphaKing himself. Your investigator, Mordecai said smoothly, leaning back in his chair, is a very persistent woman with no sense of self-preservation. I admire that about her. But she overstepped. Vesper's head snapped toward him. I overstepped? You showed up with two enforcers who could crush a human skull with their bare hands and started... Children. One of the elders spoke, his voice a dry rustle like dead leaves. This is not a debate. This is a crisis. The syndicate behind this murder is operating across pack borders, across species lines. The Accord was designed to prevent precisely this kind of territorial fragmentation. The SRB investigates. The Obsidian Pack protects its lands. Neither of you can proceed without the other. Harlow nodded grimly, which is why I've authorized a joint task force. Agent Vesper will lead the investigative side. Alpha Volkov will provide territorial access and resources. You'll work together until the syndicate is dismantled, or you've proven that cooperation is impossible. Vesper felt her stomach drop. Director, with all due respect, it's not a request. Harlow's eyes were cold. The elders have agreed to waive territorial sovereignty for the duration of this investigation. But they have conditions. One of them is that you and the Alpha maintain proximity at all times, to ensure that you actually work together instead of trying to sabotage each other. One of the elders raised a bony hand. A younger wolf, lean and sharp-featured, stepped forward from the shadows behind the elder's chair. He carried a small leather case, which he opened with reverent care. Inside lay two identical cuffs, made of the same dull gray metal Mordecai had shown her in the forest. The runes on these were different, more complex, pulsing with a sickly orange light. Symbiotic Cuffs, the young wolf announced, his voice carrying the flat neutrality of a court clerk. Standard SRB issue, modified for extended duration. They will bind you until the task force is formally dissolved by either the director or the elders. Any attempt to remove them prematurely will trigger a significant electrical discharge. Moving more than 50 meters apart will have the same effect. Vesper's blood ran cold. You can't be serious. This is the compromise, Harlow interrupted. The elders wanted a magical leash on their alpha to ensure he doesn't simply eat you and bury the body. I wanted a similar leash on you to ensure you don't file enough paperwork to bury this investigation for the next century. This is the middle ground. Mordecai rose from his chair in a single fluid motion. He crossed the room to stand beside Vesper, and she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell that intoxicating mix of rain and cologne and primal musk. His arm brushed hers, and she jerked back instinctively. "You're afraid," he observed, his voice pitched low, for her ears only. "Good. You should be." "I'm not afraid," she snapped. "I'm disgusted. There's a difference." The young wolf approached them with the cuffs extended. Vesper's hand shot out, palm flat, halting him mid-step. "Hold on. I want it on record that I am formally objecting to this arrangement on the grounds of personal safety, investigative integrity, and—" "Noted." Harlow waved a dismissive hand. "Put them on." The young wolf moved faster than she could track. One cold metal band snapped around her left wrist, and the other closed around Mordecai's right. The moment the second cuff clicked into place, a jolt of raw magic surged through her arm, up her spine, settling into her chest like a second heartbeat. The runes on both cuffs blazed orange once, then faded to a dull, constant glow. Mordecai's eyes flickered crimson again, just for an instant. Then he flexed his wrist experimentally, testing the weight of the metal. "Fascinating," he murmured. "I can feel your pulse. It's racing. Of course it's racing. I'm in a room with a predator who thinks he's charming." She turned on her heel and marched toward the door, determined to put as much distance between them as physically possible. The cuffs didn't stop her. They didn't need to. Not yet. The first shock hit her when she was 30 feet down the corridor. It wasn't a jolt. It was a full-body spasm, a flash of white-hot electricity that arsed through her nervous system and dropped her to one knee. She gasped, her vision swimming, her hand instinctively clutching the cuff. The pain receded as quickly as it had come, leaving her breathless and trembling. Mordecai appeared beside her, his face split by a thin, predatory smile. 50 meters, he said. "Good to know you're not the only one who can't count. I was starting to think I was going to have to chase you all the way back to the morgue." She pushed herself to her feet, rage burning through the lingering tremors. "You're enjoying this." "Immensely." He offered her his hand. She slapped it away. "Don't touch me." "Fine, but we have a car to catch. And I'm not getting electrocuted because you're too proud to walk beside me." He started down the corridor at a brisk pace, his stride long and confident. She had to jog to keep up, her shorter legs pumping to match his relentless rhythm. The cuffs hummed between them, a constant, low-frequency vibration that synced with her heartbeat. The elevator ride to the garage was a special kind of torment. The car was small, designed for efficiency, not comfort. Mordecai filled the space with his presence, his broad shoulders brushing against her every time the elevator swayed. He smelled like cedar and rain and something darker, something wild. She pressed herself against the far wall, but the tether made it impossible to get more than a foot away. "The scent signature on the victim," she said, forcing her mind back to the investigation. It was layered, at least 3 distinct magical signatures overlapping. That's not a random killing. That's a statement. Mordecai's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "I noticed the same thing. The wounds were precise, clinical. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing." He paused, a beat of silence stretching between them. "You saw the incision patterns? Surgical. Clean edges. No sign of struggle." She frowned, her investigator's mind already spinning theories. "That suggests the victim knew their attacker. Or they were subdued before the—" The elevator doors opened, cutting her off. Mordecai stepped out first, and she stumbled after him. the cuffs yanking at her wrist as the distance between them suddenly increased. She caught herself on the doorframe, cursing under her breath. 50 meters is a generous range, he called over his shoulder, not slowing. You might want to try walking instead of running. You'll have more control. She gritted her teeth and fell into step beside him, matching his pace with angry precision. They reached his car, a sleek black sedan that gleamed under the garage lights, and he opened the passenger door with an elaborate, mocking gesture. After you! She slid into the leather seat, her fingers already tapping at her tablet, pulling up the case files. The door closed beside her, and Mordecai's scent filled the cabin. He settled into the driver's seat, his movements unhurried, almost lazy. But his eyes were sharp, scanning the garage with the predatory vigilance of a wolf on the hunt. The blood trail I was following, Vesper said, not looking up from her tablet. Where does it lead? To the Obsidian Commercial District, specifically to a warehouse registered to a shell company that doesn't exist. He started the engine. The purr of the motor, a low, controlled growl. I had my people on it before you even arrived. The scent disappeared at the loading bay. Someone's been washing the floors with industrial solvent. Solvent? She frowned, her fingers flying across the tablet. Which solvent? There are dozens of commercially available magical deterrents. Some of them can mask werewolf scent. Some can... Can we stop with the technical questions for 5 minutes? He pulled out of the garage, his eyes fixed on the rain-slicked streets ahead. I don't answer to you. We're partners now, not supervisor and subordinate. We are not partners. We are two people who were forced together by bureaucracy and magical handcuffs. She jabbed a finger at the cuffs on their wrists. This is not a team-building exercise. This is a disaster waiting to happen. Mordecai's lips twitched. You're adorable when you're angry. I am not adorable. I am extremely competent, and you are a menace too. She stopped mid-sentence, her breath catching in her throat. The car had slowed, and she realized they were passing the warehouse district. Her tablet pinged with an incoming alert. A patrol unit had just reported a disturbance, 3 blocks from their current location. Pull over, she said sharply. He didn't argue. The car slid to a stop, and she was out the door before the engine had fully died. Mordecai followed, his long strides eating up the distance between them. The cuffs vibrated softly, a constant reminder of their enforced proximity. The disturbance was a scuffle outside a nondescript building. 2 werewolves in obsidian colors were wrestling with a man in a hooded coat, his face twisted with fear. Even from 50 feet away, Vesper could see it. The man's aura was a flickering mess of colors, his magic unstable, chaotic. Stop! She raised her hand, her voice cutting through the noise. SRB! Stand down! The werewolves didn't listen. One of them landed a blow to the hooded man's head, and he crumpled to the pavement, unconscious. Mordecai was there in an instant, his voice a low snarl that stopped his enforcers cold. Enough. Vesper crouched beside the fallen man, her fingers touching his throat. The pulse was weak but steady. His aura was still flickering, but it was stabilizing. She looked up at Mordecai. Her eyes narrowed. This is your territory, she said, her voice flat. Your people. Your mess. And this man is not a werewolf. He's a mage. A civilian. Mordecai's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his golden eyes. Recognition? Regret? It was gone before she could name it. Get him to the nearest medical facility, he said to his enforcers, and bring me the security footage. Now. They scrambled to obey. Mordecai turned back to Vesper, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick with tension. You can't just let your people beat up witnesses, she said quietly. That's not how this works. I'm aware. He stepped closer, and she was suddenly conscious of how close they were, how his chest was inches from hers. But I'm also aware that we're not going to find the syndicate by sitting in a car and arguing about who has the better methods. Your science. My instinct. They're not competing, Vesper. They're complementary. She stared at him, searching for the trap. But his face was unreadable, his eyes steady on hers. "Complimentary," she repeated, her voice dripping with skepticism. "Try it." He extended his hand, palm open. "Just once. Follow my lead. See what happens." The cuffs between them hummed, a low, steady vibration. She could feel his pulse through it, slow and steady, a counterpoint to her own racing heart. She took his hand. The warehouse door groaned on rusted hinges, and Vesper released Mordecai's hand as if it had scalded her. The warmth of his palm lingered against her skin, an unwelcome distraction she ruthlessly suppressed. She stepped into the cavernous space, her boot heels echoing against concrete. The building was a skeletal ruin of collapsed catwalks and shattered windows, rain dripping through holes in the corrugated roof to form shallow, murky puddles on the floor. The air was thick with the smell of rust, mold, and something else. Something chemical and sharp that made her nose prickle. Mordecai moved past her, his head tilted, his nostrils flaring. His eyes had shifted to that predatory gold, and the muscles in his jaw were tight with concentration. He was a creature of instinct, and in this environment, his instincts were a weapon sharper than any blade. "Blood," he said, his voice low. "Mixed with something else. Oil. And," he paused, his brow furrowing, "something organic. Synthetic. It's not werewolf. Not mage, either. It's an engineered compound." Vesper's tablet was already glowing, the luminescent dust she'd sprayed earlier responding to the faint traces of magical residue in the air. The silver particles swirled and coalesced, forming a ghostly path that led toward the back of the factory. She followed it, her fingers dancing across the screen to record every reading. "Your nose is impressive," she admitted, the words grudging. "But it can't see what I see." She gestured at the glowing trail, which was now branching into 3 distinct paths. The syndicate used a dispersal charm. They're trying to hide their tracks by splitting the signature. A clever trick. Mordecai's eyes narrowed. "Can you follow all 3? "I can follow the primary thread. The others are decoys." She tapped the tablet, and the 2 false trails faded, leaving only the brightest, most consistent path. Whoever cast this charm made a mistake. They used a standard template without accounting for the humidity in this environment. The spell's integrity is compromised. It's leaving a stronger signature than intended. You can tell all that from a glowing dust cloud? There was a note of genuine curiosity in his voice, beneath the sarcasm. "Magic is science, Alpha. Just because you don't understand the math doesn't mean it's not happening." She didn't look up from her tablet, but she could feel his gaze on her, a physical weight. "Your math," he said slowly, "is going to lead us right into the heart of their operation. That's the plan." "No, Vesper. The plan is to find them and dismantle them. You're planning to walk into their trap and observe it." She finally looked up, meeting his golden eyes. "And what's your plan? Charge in blind and rely on your teeth?" His smile was sharp, all predator. "My teeth are very effective." Before she could respond, the cuffs between them hummed, a sudden, sharp vibration that sent a jolt up her arm. Mordecai's head snapped up, his body going rigid. His nostrils flared again, and the gold in his eyes blazed to crimson. "Movement," he breathed. "3rd floor, east wing, multiple signatures, armed." Vesper didn't question the warning. Her hand was already moving, pulling a small, crystalline vial from her belt. She shattered it against the floor, and a shimmering dome of translucent energy erupted around them, just as the first bullet screamed past her ear. The shot ricocheted off the shield with a sound like breaking glass, the silver-tipped round disintegrating into harmless sparks. Vesper's hands were already weaving, her fingers tracing sigils in the air. A second barrier, smaller and denser, formed around Mordecai, conforming to his body like a second skin. "What the hell is this?" He flexed his arms. testing the magical field that now encased him. Tactical shielding. Standard SRB issue. It'll stop silver rounds and dampen magical attacks. She was already moving, her eyes scanning the catwalks above them. Don't thank me. I just don't want to be dragged down by your corpse if you get yourself killed. How thoughtful. He lunged forward, and the shield moved with him, adapting to his speed. The first shooter dropped from the catwalk, a massive figure in tactical gear, his face obscured by a helmet that gleamed with anti-magic runes. Mordecai intercepted him mid-air, his fist connecting with the man's chest in a blow that sent him crashing through a stack of rotting crates. Vesper was already casting, her fingers tracing a rapid sequence of sigils. A bolt of white-hot energy erupted from her palm, striking a second shooter who had appeared on the far catwalk. He crumpled, his weapon clattering to the floor below. "They're using anti-magic enchantments," she called out, her voice sharp with urgency. "My offensive spells are losing effectiveness. I can only hold the shields for another minute. Then don't waste energy on offense." Mordecai was a blur of motion, his tailored suit somehow untouched by the chaos around him. He moved through the factory with lethal grace, his body flowing from one target to the next with inhuman speed. A third shooter appeared from the shadows, a silver blade in hand. Mordecai caught his wrist, twisted, and the blade clattered to the floor. A moment later, the shooter followed it, unconscious. The cuffs between them buzzed, a reminder of their forced proximity. Vesper felt the magic draining from her, the shields flickering as her reserves depleted. She gritted her teeth and pushed harder, reinforcing the barrier around them with a fresh surge of energy. "Shield's failing," she said, her voice strained. "I can give you 30 more seconds. Then I'm tapped." Mordecai's head snapped toward her, his eyes blazing. Then duck. She dropped to the floor just as a volley of silver rounds tore through the space where her head had been. Mordecai was there, his body shielding hers, his arms wrapping around her and pulling her into a roll that carried them both behind a massive, rusted machinery housing. The bullets pinged off the metal, a lethal percussion that seemed to last an eternity. "Report," he snapped, his face inches from hers, his breath warm against her cheek. "How many?" "I counted 7, but I think there are more. The anti-magic enchantments are making it hard to sense their signatures." She was acutely aware of his weight pressing her against the cold concrete, the solid wall of his chest against her back. "Your enforcers. Can you call them?" "Already did. They're 3 minutes out." He shifted, and she felt the cuffs between them pulse, a jolt of shared energy that made them both gasp. "We don't have 3 minutes." Vesper's mind raced, her tactical training overriding the chaos of the moment. "I have a flash charge. It's not magical. It's standard, mundane flashbang. If I can get it into the open, it'll buy us enough time to reposition." Mordecai's eyes flicked to her belt, where a small, cylindrical canister was clipped. "You're not in a position to throw it." "I know." She looked up at him, her eyes steady despite the roar of gunfire and the pounding of her heart. "You are." For a fraction of a second, something flickered in his gaze. Surprise? Respect? It was gone before she could name it. He was already moving, his body a coiled spring of lethal energy. He took the flashbang from her belt, his fingers brushing hers, and then he was gone, a blur of motion that carried him out from behind the machinery and into the open. The shooters didn't even have time to react. The flashbang detonated with a deafening crack, a blinding white light that filled the factory and left everything else in darkness. Vesper moved, her legs pumping, her body reacting on pure instinct. She was up and running, her shields flickering back to life as she threw herself toward the cover of a collapsed conveyor belt. Mordecai appeared beside her, his chest heaving, his eyes blazing. One sleeve of his suit was torn, and there was a thin line of blood along his forearm. Silver had grazed him. "You're hit," she said, her voice flat. "It's nothing." He didn't look at the wound. His gaze was fixed on the factory's upper levels, where the sound of footsteps was retreating. They're pulling back. They're not trying to kill us anymore. They're stalling. Vesper followed his gaze, her tablet already glowing again. The luminescent trail she'd been following was now joined by a new one, a sickly green path that pulsed with malevolent energy. It was a trail of a different sort, one that led away from the factory, through a hidden door she hadn't noticed before. Escape route, she breathed. They're retreating to their base of operations. This was just a diversion. Mordecai's eyes narrowed. Then we follow. Without backup, we're outnumbered, outgunned, and my magic is nearly depleted. We're not going to get another chance. He was already moving, his long strides eating up the distance toward the hidden door. The cuffs will keep us together. And if we're going to die, Agent Vesper, I'd rather die hunting than waiting. She caught his arm, stopping him. For a moment, they stood there, the cuffs between them humming with shared energy, their gazes locked in a silent battle of wills. "You're insane," she said quietly. "Probably." He didn't smile, but something warm flickered in his eyes. "But you're still following me." She released his arm, her jaw tight. "I'm not following you. I'm investigating the escape route of a criminal syndicate. You just happen to be in the way." "Of course." He turned toward the hidden door, and she fell into step beside him, their rhythms finally aligning, their breathing synchronized. "Try to keep up." The hidden door led to a narrow staircase, spiraling down into darkness. The air grew colder, the smell of rust and chemical solvents intensifying. Vesper's tablet glowed faintly, its luminescent particles revealing a path that was both old and recently used. Footprints, fresh ones, layered over decades of dust. "They've been using this tunnel for weeks," she murmured, her finger tracing the readings. "Maybe months. There are supply caches. Equipment. They've been building something." Mordecai paused, his head tilting. "I can smell it. Something engineered. Something wrong." His nostrils flared, and his expression darkened. "It's not natural, Vesper. The scents I'm getting, they're layered, stitched together. It's like someone's been grafting different species together." Her stomach turned. "Genetic smuggling. That's what we suspected. That's what the victim was killed for. He was trying to expose them, and they silenced him. Then we have to move faster." Mordecai's voice was hard, his eyes blazing with a cold fury. "This syndicate has been operating in my territory for months without my knowledge. That ends tonight." They emerged from the tunnel into a massive underground chamber, a converted bunker that hummed with industrial machinery. Banks of computers lined the walls, their screens displaying a torrent of data. Tanks, filled with murky fluid, housed shapes that made Vesper's skin crawl. And in the center of it all, a single figure sat in a leather chair, his face obscured by shadows. "Well," the figure said, his voice a dry, mechanical rasp. "The SRB's Little Hunter and the Obsidian Alpha. I wondered when you'd find your way here. I must say, you're earlier than I anticipated. That's inconvenient." Vesper's hand went to her belt, but she didn't draw. Her magic was almost gone, her shields flickering weakly. She could feel the cuffs between them pulsing with shared energy, and she knew Mordecai could feel it too. They were running on fumes, both of them, and this was a trap. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice carrying across the chamber. "What is this place?" The figure rose, stepping into the light. He was a man, or had been once. His face was a patchwork of scars and grafts, his eyes a mismatched pair of blue and brown that seemed to belong to different people. He smiled, and it was a terrible thing to witness. "Call me the architect," he said. "And this, Agent Vesper, is my masterpiece." The architect's masterpiece exploded behind them in a cascade of fire and shrapnel, Vesper's last flashbang detonating against the central console as they ran. The tunnel shook, dust and debris raining down from the ceiling, and she felt Mordecai's hand clamp around her wrist, dragging her forward through the chaos. They burst out of the hidden door and into the factory's main floor, the night air cool against her sweat-slicked skin. Vesper stumbled, her legs giving out, but Mordecai caught her, his arm around her waist, pulling her upright. "Keep moving," he growled. "They'll have reinforcements." She didn't argue. Her magic was completely drained, her shields gone, and every muscle in her body screamed with exhaustion. But she forced her legs to move, matching his relentless pace as they crossed the factory floor and burst through a side exit into the rain-soaked alley beyond. Mordecai's enforcers met them at the corner, their faces grim, their weapons drawn. The AlphaKing barked a series of commands in a guttural language she didn't recognize, and the pack fanned out, securing the perimeter. "Safe house," he said, his voice clipped. "Now." The safe house was a nondescript apartment above a laundromat in the Obsidian Commercial District. The walls were reinforced with silver mesh, the windows fitted with magical dampeners, and the air smelled faintly of bleach and old coffee. Vesper collapsed onto a threadbare couch, her hands trembling as she unclipped her tablet and set it on the scarred wooden table. Mordecai stood by the window, his silhouette sharp against the flickering neon sign outside. He was holding his right arm carefully, his jaw tight with pain. The silver graze on his forearm had stopped bleeding, but the wound was angry and red, the edges already starting to blacken. "You need to treat that," Vesper said, her voice flat. "Silver poisoning is no joke for your kind." "I'm aware." He didn't turn around. "It'll heal. Give it a few hours." "Hours you don't have." She pushed herself upright, crossing to her bag. "The poison will spread. It'll slow your reflexes, cloud your judgment. And we have an investigation to finish." He turned then, his golden eyes meeting hers. There was no arrogance in his gaze now, only a cold, calculating assessment. "You're barely standing yourself. Your magic is depleted." "My magic is not what's going to save your arm." She pulled out her first aid kit, a sleek silver case etched with SRB runes, and set it on the table. "Sit down. This is going to hurt." He didn't argue. He crossed to the table and lowered himself into the chair across from her, his movements careful, controlled. He shrugged off his jacket, wincing as the fabric pulled against the wound. His shirt followed, and Vesper forced herself to focus on the injury, not the lean, corded muscle of his torso. The graze was ugly. The silver had cauterized the wound as it passed, leaving a blackened furrow of damaged tissue. The edges were puckered and angry, the skin around them already starting to show signs of necrosis. "Silver bullets," she muttered, opening her kit. "They're escalating. Standard thugs don't use silver ammunition. This was a professional hit." "The architect," Mordecai said, his voice dark. "He's been planning this for a long time. The equipment in that bunker, the tanks. He's not just smuggling genetics. He's manufacturing something." Vesper's hands moved with practiced precision, selecting a vial of clear liquid from her kit. She uncapped it, and the sharp, astringent smell of dissolved silver antidote filled the air. "This is going to burn! Don't move!" She poured the liquid directly into the wound, and Mordecai's body went rigid, a low snarl escaping his throat. His hand shot out, gripping the edge of the table, so hard the wood creaked. But he didn't pull away, didn't make a sound beyond that first snarl. "Your tolerance is impressive," she observed, her voice clinical, as she reached for a second vial. "Most werewolves would be screaming right now." "I've had worse." His voice was strained, but his eyes were fixed on her face, watching her every movement. "You're very good at this. I've had a lot of practice." She didn't look up from her work, applying a thick, gel-like salve to the wound with a spatula. "The SRB doesn't send us into the field without extensive medical training. We're often the first responders on scene. And you never flinch. It wasn't a question. I've seen you face down a room full of armed mercenaries, watch a bullet miss your head by inches, and you never once looked afraid. You never even blinked." Vesper paused, her hands stilling for a fraction of a second. Then she resumed her work, her movements steady. "Panic doesn't help. Fear is a biological response to a perceived threat. It triggers the release of adrenaline and cortisol, which impairs cognitive function. You can't make good decisions if you're terrified. Mordecai's lips twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. And you always make good decisions? I make calculated decisions based on the available data. The outcome is irrelevant. The process is what matters. The process. He repeated the word, as if tasting it. You reduce everything to a process. The crime scene, the investigation, the fight, even patching up a stranger's wound. It's all just a series of steps to you. It's the only way to survive in this job. She reached for a roll of sterile bandage, beginning to wrap his arm with practiced efficiency. If you let yourself feel everything, you'd break. The violence, the death, the constant pressure. You have to build walls around it, or it consumes you. His eyes searched hers, and for a moment, she saw something flicker in his gaze. Something that might have been understanding, or recognition, or pity. And what happens when those walls come down? He asked quietly. She finished the bandage with a final, precise wrap and released his arm. They don't. I don't let them. He flexed his fingers, testing the bandage. The salve was already working, the blackened edges of the wound beginning to recede. His golden eyes were softer now, the predatory edge dulled by exhaustion and something else she couldn't quite name. Thank you, he said. The words were awkward, unfamiliar on his tongue. For saving my arm. Don't thank me. I just didn't want to be stuck with a partner who can't hold a weapon. She turned away, gathering her supplies. We have work to do. She spread the evidence across the table, the fragments they'd managed to salvage from the factory. A data chip from the central console, partially damaged but still readable. A torn piece of fabric from one of the shooters, embroidered with a symbol she didn't recognize. And photographs, printed from her tablet, of the tanks and the machinery. The architect, she said, her finger tracing the symbol on the fabric. That's a signature. He wants to be identified. He's not hiding. He's building a brand. Mordecai leaned forward, his injured arm cradled against his chest. The tanks. What were they growing? Genetic material. Werewolf, mostly, but I detected traces of vampire and fae DNA as well. He's not just smuggling. He's synthesizing, creating hybrids. She pulled up a series of readings on her tablet. This data chip has a partial manifest. It lists a series of shipments, all scheduled for tonight, to a location that's not on any map. Mordecai's eyes narrowed. A black market auction. That's the culmination. He's built enough product to sell to the highest bidder. Vesper nodded grimly. And we're going to shut it down. But there's a problem. The auction is invitation only, and it's guarded by magical bouncers who are trained to detect law enforcement signatures. The moment I step through the door, they'll know I'm SRB. Mordecai was silent for a long moment. Then he leaned back in his chair, his golden eyes fixed on her with a calculating intensity that made her skin prickle. Then we make you look like something else, he said slowly. Something they wouldn't question. Vesper frowned. What exactly do you have in mind? The Obsidian Pack has connections. There's a subculture within the underground that respects power above all else. If you arrived as my guest, my consort, they wouldn't dare screen you. Your consort. Her voice was flat. You want me to pretend to be your girlfriend? I want you to pretend to be my territory. He stood, pacing toward the window. It's a common arrangement at these auctions. The powerful bring their trophies. It's disgusting, but it's accepted. If you're seen as a possession, not a person, they won't look too closely. And how exactly do we make that convincing? He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. There's a ritual, a claiming bite. It's a temporary mark, magical in nature, that would hide your official signature and replace it with mine. It would make you smell like the Obsidian Pack, like me. Vesper's stomach turned. You want to bite me. I want to save your life and complete this investigation. The bite is just a means to an end. His voice was clinical, mirroring her own tone from moments ago. It's not real. It's a disguise, a temporary measure that will fade once the cuffs are removed. She stared at him, her mind racing through the implications. The ritual was invasive, intimate. It would leave a mark on her neck, a physical reminder of his presence that she couldn't easily hide. But he was right. It was the only way to get past the bouncers. "Fine," she said, her voice clipped. "Do it." Mordecai crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping inches from her. His hand came up, his fingers brushing against her throat, tilting her head to expose the curve of her neck. His touch was warm, surprisingly gentle, and she could feel the steady thrum of his pulse through his fingertips. "Don't flinch," he murmured. "And don't bite me. I'm told it's not a pleasant experience." Before she could respond, his lips were against her skin. The bite was sharp, a brief, piercing pain that made her gasp. But then something else flooded through her, a wave of warmth that spread from the point of contact, radiating through her entire body. It was like being wrapped in sunlight, a sensation so intense and unexpected that she swayed on her feet. Mordecai pulled back, his eyes blazing crimson, his breathing ragged. The mark on her neck glowed faintly, a silvery sigil that pulsed once and then faded into her skin. "There," he said, his voice rough. "It's done." Vesper raised a hand to her throat, feeling the smooth skin where the mark had been. The warmth was still there, a low hum of energy that seemed to synchronize with the cuffs between them. "I feel different," she admitted. "It's the bond." He stepped back, putting distance between them. "Temporary. It'll fade. But for now, you smell like Pac. Like me." She met his eyes, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was charged, electric, the cuffs humming with shared energy. "Tonight," she said finally, her voice steady despite the chaos inside her. "We infiltrate the auction. We find the architect. And we shut this down." Mordecai nodded slowly. "Tonight." But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of uncertainty, that made her wonder if the bond was as temporary as he claimed. Vesper pulled the collar of her tactical shirt down, exposing the curve of her neck. "Let's make this quick. I have a deposition tomorrow morning at 9, and I can't have any visible scarring." Mordecai stared at her, his golden eyes unreadable. "You want me to bite you, right now, in a safe house, while we're both exhausted and running on adrenaline. I want you to perform a temporary claiming ritual to mask my scent signature." She gestured impatiently at the mark on her neck. "It's a standard infiltration procedure. I've read the documentation. The bite creates a magical overlay that suppresses my SRB aura and replaces it with Pac scent. It's temporary, clinical, completely harmless." Mordecai didn't move. His jaw was tight, the muscles in his throat working as he swallowed. "You've read the documentation." "Extensively. I'm a preparer, Alpha. I don't walk into situations blind." She tilted her head, exposing more of her throat. "Avoid the jugular. I need to be able to speak clearly for my deposition. And try to make it as shallow as possible. The healing process can be uncomfortable if you go too deep. You're giving me instructions on how to bite you. I'm providing parameters for a medical procedure." Her voice was flat, clinical. "This is no different from administering a vaccine or setting a bone. It's a means to an end. Now, are you going to do this, or do I need to find another Alpha who's less squeamish?" Something flickered in his gaze. Not anger. Something else. Something raw and possessive that made the air between them thicken. "You think I'm squeamish? I think you're hesitating, and we don't have time for hesitation." She stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. "Do it." His hand came up, his fingers brushing against her throat with a gentleness that belied his size. His thumb traced the curve of her jaw, tilting her head to the perfect angle. She could smell him now, that wild, intoxicating scent of rain and cedar and ancient forests. It was stronger than before, overwhelming, and she felt her pulse quicken in response. "Remember," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Shallow. Clinical. This is just a procedure." His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Clinical," he repeated. "Right." And then his mouth was against her neck. The first brush of his lips was warm, almost tender. Then his fangs descended, and the bite was sharp, a brief, piercing pain that made her gasp. But the pain lasted only a fraction of a second. What followed was something else entirely. Warmth flooded through her, a wave of heat that started at the point of contact and radiated outward, spreading through her entire body like wildfire. It was intoxicating, overwhelming, a sensation so intense and all-consuming that she forgot how to breathe. Her knees buckled, and she would have collapsed if his arm hadn't wrapped around her waist, pulling her against him. Dimly, she was aware of the cuffs between them, the runes blazing with a brilliant, pulsing light. The bond that had been a low hum between them suddenly roared to life, a torrent of shared sensation and emotion that threatened to drown her. She could feel him, feel the steady rhythm of his heart, the surge of possessive instinct that was flooding his veins. And beneath it all, something else, something terrifying and primal that resonated with the deepest part of her soul. Mate. The word wasn't spoken. It was felt, a recognition that went beyond logic or reason. She had spent her entire life building walls, constructing a fortress of clinical detachment that kept the chaos of the supernatural world at bay. And in a single, searing moment, those walls had crumbled to dust. Mordecai pulled back, his eyes blazing crimson, his breathing ragged. His hand was still cupping her throat, his thumb stroking the mark he'd just made. The claiming bite was a silvery sigil, pulsing with the same light as the cuffs. Vesper. His voice was rough, barely recognizable. I can feel you. Everything. Your heartbeat, your pulse, the way your magic is. It's... She pushed against his chest, trying to put distance between them. But her body wouldn't obey. Every nerve was singing, every cell aware of his proximity. The warmth was still there, thrumming through her veins, and she wanted to lean into it, to press closer, to... No. She forced her eyes open, forced herself to meet his gaze. "The bond," she said, her voice cracking. It's not supposed to do that. Tell me something I don't know." His hand was still on her throat, his thumb tracing the mark with an intimacy that made her skin prickle. "I can smell you. Not just your scent. Your essence. It's overwhelming. I can't think straight." The cuffs between them pulsed again, and she felt a jolt of shared energy that made them both gasp. The tether was stronger now, more insistent, a constant reminder of the connection that had just been forged. "We have to break this," she said, her voice steadier now, though her body was still trembling. "There has to be a way to sever the bond. It's a temporary marking ritual. It shouldn't have triggered a full mate response." Mordecai's eyes narrowed, the crimson fading back to gold. "You think I did this on purpose?" "I think you're a manipulative alpha who's used to getting what he wants. I think..." His hand dropped from her throat, and he stepped back, putting a foot of distance between them. The cuffs pulled, and she stumbled forward, her body instinctively moving to close the gap. "Stay back," he said, his voice sharp. "Stay still. I need a moment to breathe." She froze, her arms wrapped around herself, her body trembling with the effort of resisting the pull of the bond. The warmth was still there, a constant, humming presence that was both comforting and terrifying. She could feel him, feel his struggle to regain control, the way his instincts were warring with his reason. "We need to focus," she said, forcing the words out. "The auction. Tonight. We still have a mission." "I know." His voice was strained, his jaw tight. "I know. But I can't think straight when you're this close. The bond is making everything He shook his head. Frustration etched into every line of his face. Vesper took a deep breath, forcing herself to think. The clinical detachment she'd relied on her entire life was fractured, the walls she'd built crumbling around her. But she was still an investigator, still a professional. She could still do her job. Distance, she said, her voice sharp. We need to create physical distance. The cuffs give us 50 meters. We can work in separate parts of the safe house while we plan. He nodded, his eyes still fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Separate rooms. Yes. Good. I'll take the bedroom. You take the living room. We'll communicate via tablet. She nodded, backing away from him, one careful step at a time. The pull of the bond was still there, insistent and demanding, but she forced herself to resist it. 1 hour, she said. We rest, we regroup, and then we move. The auction starts at midnight. We have to be ready. I'll be ready. His voice was low, controlled, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands were clenched at his sides. Vesper. She paused at the door to the living room, not turning around. The bond, he said quietly. It's not a mistake, and it's not temporary. I don't know what we're going to do about it, but I won't let it compromise the mission. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of his words. The bond was real. It was permanent, and it had just changed everything. Understood, she said, her voice flat. Now let's focus on the mission. We can deal with the rest later. She stepped into the living room and closed the door behind her, leaning against it as her knees finally gave out. She slid to the floor, her hands pressed against her chest, feeling the rapid rhythm of her heart. The bond was still there, a constant presence in the back of her mind. She could feel him, feel his heartbeat, feel the steady rhythm of his breathing. And beneath it all, a fierce, possessive pride that made her stomach flip. She'd been wrong. The bite wasn't clinical. It wasn't temporary. It was a claiming, a binding, a connection that went beyond logic and reason. And somehow, despite every wall she'd ever built, she wasn't sure she wanted it to end. The black sedan pulled up to the warehouse's rear entrance at exactly 11:45, and Vesper's hand was already on the door handle before the engine had fully died. Mordecai's fingers closed around her wrist, stopping her. Remember, he said, his voice low, rough. You're mine tonight. Claimed. Possessive. The kind of human companion who doesn't look at anyone else. I read the briefing. She yanked her wrist free, but the contact had already sent a jolt through her, the bond humming in response. I know how to act. Do you? His golden eyes swept over her, lingering on the claiming mark on her neck. The silvery sigil was still visible, pulsing faintly with a light that matched the runes on their cuffs. Because the bond is making it hard for me to think straight, and if I can feel it, so can you. She forced herself to meet his gaze, to push past the warmth that was threatening to cloud her judgment. The bond is irrelevant. We have a mission. Focus. He nodded slowly, but there was something in his eyes, a possessive hunger that made her stomach flip. Then he was out of the car, his tailored suit immaculate, his stride confident. She fell into step beside him, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough to smell that intoxicating scent of rain and cedar and power. The warehouse entrance was guarded by 2 massive werewolves in black tactical gear. Their eyes glowed amber as they scanned Vesper, their nostrils flaring as they caught her scent. The claiming mark on her neck pulsed, and she felt a surge of satisfaction from the bond. Mordecai was marking his territory, and his instincts were roaring with approval. Alpha Volkov, one of the guards rumbled, his voice thick with deference. We weren't expecting you tonight. I'm not on the list. Mordecai's voice was cold, dismissive. But I'm bringing a substantial investment to tonight's auction, and I don't need to be on the list. The guards exchanged a glance, their ears flattening. The architect's orders. No unregistered guests. Mordecai stepped closer, and the air around them seemed to compress. His aura flared, a suffocating wave of alpha dominance that made Vesper's knees weak. She felt it through the bond, the raw, primal power that he wielded like a weapon. "You're questioning me?" His voice was soft, almost gentle, but there was a razor's edge beneath it. "In my territory? With my pack's resources funding half of this operation?" The guards backed away, their hands raised in surrender. "No, Alpha. Of course not. Please, come in. The architect will be pleased to see you." Mordecai didn't acknowledge them. He strode past them into the warehouse, and Vesper followed, her heart pounding, her hand brushing against his arm as they passed through the door. The interior was nothing like the grimy factory they'd raided hours ago. This was opulence, a palace of gleaming marble and crystal chandeliers that hung from vaulted ceilings. The walls were lined with velvet curtains, and the floor was a mosaic of obsidian and gold. Supernatural beings of every species mingled in small clusters, their voices a low murmur of deals and negotiations. Vampires in designer gowns, werewolves in bespoke suits, fae with glittering wings folded against their backs. Vesper's fingers danced over her hidden tablet, the device concealed in her sleeve, its scanning magic already at work. The genetic samples. She could feel them, a faint, pulsing energy, hidden somewhere in the depths of the auction house. "Stop scanning," Mordecai murmured, his lips brushing against her ear. "You're projecting. I can feel your magic spiking." She forced her hands still, forcing a smile onto her face. "Sorry? Nervous. Don't be." His arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her close. His fingers pressed against her hip, a subtle reminder of their cover. "You're with me. No one will touch you." She leaned into him, her body responding to the warmth of his touch despite herself. The bond was humming, a constant, low vibration that made it hard to focus. She could feel his heartbeat, steady and strong, and beneath it, a possessive pride that was both terrifying and exhilarating. "Your reputation is useful," she whispered, her lips moving against his collarbone. "They didn't even question you. My reputation is the only reason we're still alive." He guided her through the crowd, his hand never leaving her waist. "The architect knows I don't play games. If I'm here, it's because I want something. And he'll want to know what." They reached the VIP section, a raised platform lined with velvet chairs and crystal decanters. A fey woman with silver hair and sharp, knowing eyes approached them, her smile wide and predatory. "Alpha Volkov," she purred. "We weren't expecting you, but we are, of course, delighted. The architect sends his regards." Her eyes flicked to Vesper, lingering on the claiming mark. "And you've brought a companion. How domestic." Vesper forced herself to smile, to press closer to Mordecai's side. "He's been telling me about this place for weeks. I had to see it for myself. And what do you think?" The fae's smile didn't waver, but her eyes were sharp, assessing. "It's impressive." Vesper let her gaze drift over the room, scanning for the source of the genetic energy. "I've never seen anything like it. All these people, all this power, in one place." The fey woman laughed, a tinkling sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, well, tonight's auction is particularly special. We have items that will change the balance of power in the supernatural world. You've come at the perfect time." Mordecai's fingers tightened on Vesper's hip. "We'll take our seats." They settled into two plush chairs at the edge of the VIP section, the cuffs between them humming with shared energy. Vesper's tablet was still active, the scanning magic working overtime to pinpoint the genetic samples. She could feel them now, a concentrated cluster of energy somewhere beneath the auction stage. "The architect has a vault," she murmured, her lips barely moving. "Underground! The samples are there." Mordecai leaned in, his hand coming up to cup her face, his thumb stroking her jaw. "The stage is a distraction," he murmured back, his voice a low growl that could have been a lover's whisper. "He's auctioning decoy samples. The real product is underneath." "Then we need to get down there." Working on it. His hand moved from her jaw to her throat, his fingers tracing the claiming mark. The contact sent a jolt of warmth through her, and she had to suppress a gasp. How deep is the vault? 15 meters. Reinforced. There's an enchantment around it that's blocking my scans. I can't get a clear reading. The lights dimmed, and a spotlight illuminated the stage. The architect stepped out from behind a velvet curtain, his patchwork face split by that terrible smile. The crowd fell silent, every eye fixed on the figure at the center of the stage. "Welcome, friends," he said, his mechanical voice echoing through the chamber. "Tonight, we have something truly special, something that will change the course of supernatural history." Vesper's fingers tightened on Mordecai's arm. "He's stalling. The real auction hasn't started yet. There's a secondary event happening somewhere else." The architect's mismatched eyes swept the room, and for a moment, they lingered on the VIP section. On Vesper. On Mordecai. His smile widened. "But first," he continued, "we must address an elephant in the room. The SRB is here, and they've brought a guest of honor." The spotlight swung toward the VIP section, and Vesper felt her blood run cold. The crowd turned, hundreds of eyes fixed on them. Mordecai was already on his feet, his body moving to shield hers, his aura flaring with protective rage. "Vesper," he growled, his voice low. "Get ready to run." Not without the samples. She was already on her feet, her hands tracing sigils in the air. "We need to buy time." The architect laughed, a dry, rasping sound that echoed through the chamber. "Time? My dear Agent Vesper, you've been a guest in my house for 10 minutes. And in that time, I've already moved the real product. You're too late." The guards were moving, a wave of black-clad figures surging toward the VIP section. Vesper's shields flared to life, a dome of shimmering energy that encased them both. "Too late?" Mordecai's voice was cold, lethal. "We're the ones who walked into your operation. We're not too late. We're exactly on time." The architect's smile faltered. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Mordecai's hand was at Vesper's throat, his thumb stroking the claiming mark. "You've been tracking me since I arrived. You've seen my companion. You've seen the bond. And you think I walked in here without a plan?" Vesper felt it through the bond, the surge of his power, the crackling energy that was building in the air around them. He was preparing to strike. "You don't need a plan," Vesper said quietly. "You just need to trust me." She reached into her sleeve and pulled out a small, crystalline orb. The flash charge. She'd kept it hidden, a last resort for exactly this situation. Mordecai's eyes met hers, and for a moment, she saw fear flicker in his gaze. Not for himself. For her. "On 3, she said. 1, 2. Vesper's fingers closed around the crystal orb. 3. She hurled it toward the chandelier, the flash charge detonating against the crystal in a blinding cascade of white light and shattering glass. The chandelier crashed to the floor in a rain of diamonds, sending the crowd into chaos. Screams, shouts, the crash of overturned furniture. Mordecai was already moving, his body a blur of lethal motion. He intercepted the first guard before the man could raise his weapon, his fist connecting with the werewolf's jaw in a crack of bone and teeth. The guard crumpled, and Mordecai grabbed his fallen rifle, using it as a club to sweep the legs out from under a second attacker. Vesper's hands were weaving, her magic surging despite her depleted reserves. The bond was feeding her, Mordecai's raw power flowing through the connection and fueling her spells. A shimmering shield erupted around them, deflecting a volley of silver bullets that would have torn through her chest. "Vault entrance!" she shouted over the chaos, pointing toward a false wall behind the stage. "The samples are down there!" Mordecai's response was a feral snarl as he tackled a third guard, driving the man through a marble column. The pillar shattered, raining debris across the VIP section. He was on his feet in an instant, his suit torn, his eyes blazing crimson, his claws extended and dripping with blood. "Cover me!" He lunged toward the false wall, his body slamming against it with the force of a wrecking ball. The wall exploded inward, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling down into darkness. Vesper followed, her shields flaring as she deflected another volley of bullets. The architect was shouting orders from the stage, his patchwork face twisted with fury. But the crowd was in full panic, a stampede of supernatural beings fighting to escape the collapsing auction hall. The staircase led to a reinforced vault, the walls lined with silver and enchanted wards. The genetic samples were there, row after row of glass vials containing shimmering liquids that pulsed with malevolent light. Vesper's tablet screamed with alerts, the scanning magic confirming what she already knew. These were the stolen genetics. The architect's entire operation, distilled into glass and liquid. "We need to destroy them," she said, her voice sharp. "All of them." Mordecai was already moving, his claws slicing through the reinforced glass. The vials shattered, their contents spilling across the floor in a hissing, smoking pool of corruption. The ground shook, the building groaning in protest as the structural damage from the fight above spread downward. "He'll have a secondary detonation system," Vesper said, her fingers flying across her tablet. "If he can't have the samples, he'll destroy them. But he won't destroy the data. He's too arrogant for that." She found it, a hidden server tucked behind the wall, its circuits blazing with encrypted data. The architect's entire network, every transaction, every buyer, every shipment. She pulled a small silver drive from her belt and plugged it in, the download progress bar crawling across her screen. 20 seconds, she said, her voice strained. "Make it 10. Mordecai was at her side, his body a wall between her and the staircase. The sounds of pursuit were growing louder, the pounding of boots on the stairs. "They're coming!" The download hit 90%, 95. The first guard appeared at the top of the stairs, his weapon raised. Mordecai was already in motion, his body a blur of motion that carried him up the stairs in 3 bounds. The guard fired, the silver bullet grazing Mordecai's shoulder, but he didn't slow. His claws found the guard's throat, and the man fell, silent, 100%. Vesper yanked the drive free, shoving it into her pocket. "Got it! Let's go!" The vault was collapsing around them, the walls buckling under the strain. Mordecai grabbed her hand, his fingers locking with hers, and they ran. The bond was singing between them, a desperate, primal rhythm that synchronized their footsteps, their breathing, their hearts. They burst out of the vault entrance just as the stage collapsed, the massive crystal chandelier crashing to the floor in a shower of sparks and glass. The architect was nowhere to be seen, vanished into the chaos of the fleeing crowd. "Don't stop!" Vesper shouted, her shields flaring around them as the building shuddered, the ceiling beginning to cave in. They ran through the ruined auction hall, past overturned chairs and shattered marble, past the bodies of fallen guards and fleeing patrons. The exit was ahead, a sliver of night sky, visible through the collapsing walls. Mordecai's arm was around her waist, pulling her forward, his body shielding hers from the falling debris. A massive beam crashed down behind them, blocking their path, but he didn't slow. He leaped over a pile of rubble, pulling her with him, his momentum carrying them both through the exit and into the cool night air. The building collapsed behind them, a roar of concrete and glass that shook the ground and sent dust billowing into the sky. Vesper stumbled, her knees giving out, but Mordecai caught her, his arms wrapping around her as they collapsed together into the mud of the rain-soaked street. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Vesper was gasping, her lungs burning, her body trembling with exhaustion. She could feel Mordecai's heart pounding against her back, feel the bond humming between them, a steady, reassuring presence in the chaos. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough, strained. "Just tired." She pushed herself upright, her eyes scanning the ruins. The building was gone, nothing but rubble and dust. The syndicate's operation was destroyed, but the architect was still out there, somewhere. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. SRB backup, finally arriving. Vesper's tablet beeped with incoming messages, a stream of alerts from Director Harlow demanding an update. Mordecai rose to his feet, offering her his hand. She took it, letting him pull her upright. The cuffs between them hummed softly, the runes flickering with the remnants of the bond's energy. "Vesper!" A familiar voice cut through the chaos. Director Harlow strode across the rubble, her face grim, flanked by a squad of SRB tactical enforcers. "Report! Now!" "The architect's operation is destroyed," Vesper said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "I have the data from his network. Everything. Every transaction. Every buyer. Every shipment. We can trace this all the way to the top." Harlow's eyes flicked to the cuffs on their wrists. "And the samples? Destroyed." Vesper's gaze flicked to Mordecai. "The Alpha made sure of that." Harlow nodded, a faint gleam of approval in her eyes. "Good. Then this assignment is complete." She gestured to a magical enforcer, a tall, thin woman in silver robes. "Release them." The enforcer approached, her hands tracing sigils in the air. The cuffs hummed, the runes blazing bright orange, and then they fell away, clattering to the ground. Vesper felt the bond sever with a jolt that left her dizzy, a sudden, aching emptiness in the space where Mordecai's presence had been. She staggered, her hand braced against a nearby wall. The bond was gone. The constant hum of his heartbeat, the warmth of his magic, the possessive prickle of his instincts. All of it vanished. Mordecai's eyes met hers, and for a moment, she saw something flicker in his gaze. Loss? Regret? It was gone before she could name it. Agent Vesper. His voice was formal, controlled. It was an experience. A professional one, she said, her voice equally flat. "I'll have my report to the director by morning." "See that you do." He turned away, his enforcers converging around him, a wall of muscle and loyalty that sealed him off from her. He didn't look back. Vesper watched him go, the emptiness in her chest a dull ache that refused to fade. The bond was gone. The cuffs were gone. The investigation was over. But the image of his golden eyes, the feel of his hand in hers, the warmth of his presence in her mind, those were not gone. Those were etched into her memory, permanent and unforgettable. "Vesper," Harlow's voice cut through her thoughts. "Your report. I need it on my desk by 9. "Of course, Director." Vesper straightened her spine, forcing herself to focus. "I'll have it ready." She turned away from the ruins, from the chaos, from the lingering memory of a bond that had been severed as easily as it had been forged. The walls she'd built around her heart were back in place, solid and impenetrable. But the crack was still there, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that it would never fully heal. The fluorescent lights of SRB headquarters hummed their monotonous, sterile song, and Vesper stared at the mountain of paperwork on her desk with the hollow resignation of a woman who had survived a war only to be buried in its administrative aftermath. 3 days had passed since the auction. 3 days since the cuffs had been removed. 3 days since she'd felt Mordecai's presence in her mind. A warmth that had faded to a cold, aching emptiness she refused to acknowledge. Her hand drifted to her neck, her fingers brushing against the claiming mark. The silvery sigil was still there, a faint, pulsing reminder of the bond that had been severed. She'd tried every magical remedy in the SRB's arsenal to remove it, but nothing worked. The mark was permanent, etched into her skin like a brand. She dropped her hand, forcing herself to focus on the report in front of her. The architect was still at large, his network shattered, but his personal whereabouts unknown. The data she'd recovered had led to a series of arrests across the supernatural underworld, but the mastermind himself had vanished into the shadows. A commotion at the front of the bullpen pulled her attention. Raised voices, the clatter of overturned chairs, the unmistakable sound of someone who did not belong in a bureaucratic office making their presence known. Vesper looked up, and her heart stopped. Mordecai Volkov strode through the SRB headquarters like he owned it. His tailored charcoal suit was immaculate, his dark hair slicked back, his golden eyes sweeping the room with the predatory confidence of a wolf surveying his territory. Behind him, a retinue of sleek, sharp-eyed corporate lawyers in identical black suits followed in his wake, clutching leather briefcases and tablet devices. The bullpen had gone silent. Junior agents stared, their jaws hanging open. Senior analysts scrambled to look busy, their eyes darting toward the AlphaKing with a mixture of fear and fascination. Mordecai's gaze found Vesper, and his lips curved into a thin, predatory smile. He crossed the room in unhurried strides, his lawyers parting around him like a school of sharks. He stopped in front of her desk and placed a thick, leather-bound document on the surface with a soft thud that echoed through the silent room. "Agent Vesper," he said, his voice a low, resonant purr. "I believe we have some unfinished business." Vesper's hand tightened on her pen, the plastic creaking under the pressure. "Alpha Volkov, this is a surprise. I wasn't aware you had any business at the SRB headquarters. I have a great deal of business here." He gestured to the lawyers, who fanned out around her desk, their expressions impassive. "Specifically, with you." She forced herself to meet his gaze, to keep her expression flat and professional despite the chaos erupting inside her. "I'm afraid I'm swamped with paperwork. Perhaps you could schedule an appointment through the proper channels." "Oh, this is a proper channel." He leaned forward, his hands bracing on the edge of her desk, his face inches from hers. The scent of rain and cedar and wild forests washed over her, and she felt the claiming mark on her neck pulse in response. "I've filed the appropriate documentation. I've consulted with the Obsidian Pack's legal team. I've even had a brief, extremely tedious conversation with Director Harlow. Everything is above board." Vesper's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" He straightened, reaching into his jacket and pulling out a slim, silver pen. He uncapped it with a deliberate click and pointed to the document on her desk. "The SRB Obsidian Pack Joint Cooperation Memorandum," he announced, his voice carrying through the silent bullpen. "It's been ratified by the Council of Elders and approved by the Accord Tribunal. It formalizes the partnership between our two organizations for the foreseeable future." Vesper stared at the document, her mind racing. That's a standard cooperation treaty. Every pack has one. Ah, but this one is different." He flipped the document open, his finger tracing down a page dense with legal jargon. "I took the liberty of adding a few clauses. At the request of my lawyers, of course." She snatched the document from the desk, her eyes scanning the text. The language was dense, impenetrable, a maze of bureaucratic boilerplate designed to confuse and obfuscate. But buried in the middle of the document, highlighted in bold, was a single clause. Clause 108, Compliance Supervision and Oversight. "In the interest of maintaining the integrity of the Joint Cooperation Framework," she read aloud, her voice flat, "the SRB shall assign a senior auditor to conduct regular compliance supervision meetings with the designated Obsidian Pack liaison. Such meetings shall occur no fewer than 3 times per week and shall be conducted in a location mutually agreeable to both parties. The designated auditor shall be selected based on prior working relationship with the Obsidian Pack and demonstrated expertise in cross-species investigative protocols." She looked up, her eyes narrowing to slits. "You wrote this." "I drafted it," Mordecai corrected, his smile widening. "My lawyers polished it. The elders approved it. Director Harlow signed it. It's legally binding." "You can't force me to attend meetings with you. That's not how." "Oh, but I can." He leaned forward again, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper. "You're the only senior auditor with a prior working relationship with the Obsidian Pack. You're the only one with demonstrated expertise in cross-species investigative protocols. The document specifies that the SRB must assign a specific individual. And you, Agent Vesper, are the only one who fits the qualifications. Vesper's jaw tightened. She could feel the eyes of the entire bullpen on her, their stares burning into her skin. The mark on her neck was throbbing, a physical reminder of the bond that refused to fade. "This is insane," she said, her voice low. "You can't just—" "I just did." His golden eyes were blazing with triumph. "You think you're the only one who can weaponize bureaucracy, Agent Vesper? I've been reading your case files. I've been studying your methods. You're a master of the system, and I'm a very fast learner." She stared at him, her mind racing through the implications. The clause was airtight. The document was signed. She could fight it, could file an appeal, but that would take months, years. And in the meantime, she'd be legally required to attend those meetings. 3 nights a week, she said, her voice flat. "That's what you're demanding?" "I'm requesting," he corrected, his smile sharp. "Compliance supervision meetings. The location is mutually agreeable. We could meet at my office, or your apartment, or a restaurant, or a park. Anywhere, really. The document doesn't specify the nature of the supervision. That's open to interpretation." Her hand clenched around the document, the paper crinkling under her grip. "You planned this." "I'm always planning, Agent Vesper." He reached across the desk, his fingers brushing against hers. The contact sent a jolt through her, the claiming mark pulsing with sudden warmth. "The bond isn't gone. It's just dormant. I can feel it every time I think about you. And I've been thinking about you a lot." She yanked her hand back, but the warmth lingered, a persistent reminder of what they'd shared. "This is harassment. I could report you." "You could, but you won't." His eyes searched hers, and for a moment, the arrogance faded, replaced by something raw and vulnerable. "Because you felt it too. The bond. The connection. It wasn't just a ritual, Vesper. It was real." She opened her mouth to deny it, to throw up the walls she'd spent a lifetime building. But the words wouldn't come. The claiming mark was pulsing, a steady rhythm that matched her heartbeat, and she could feel him through it, feel the steady thrum of his presence in the back of her mind. "This is ridiculous," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're not— this isn't—" "Mordecai," he said softly. "My name is Mordecai, and this is very, very real." He stepped back, adjusting his cuffs with deliberate nonchalance. The lawyers were already closing their briefcases, their work done, their presence no longer required. "Wednesday night," he said, his voice carrying a note of finality. 7 o'clock. I'll pick you up at your apartment. Wear something comfortable. We're going to have a compliance supervision meeting." She watched him stride toward the exit, his lawyers trailing behind him like a flock of obedient crows. He paused at the door, turning to look back at her over his shoulder. "And Vesper?" His smile was warm, genuine, and utterly disarming. "I'm very good at compliance supervision." He was gone, the door swinging shut behind him. The bullpen remained frozen in silence, every eye fixed on her. Vesper sank back into her chair, the document clutched in her hands. The claiming mark on her neck was still pulsing, a steady, reassuring presence that felt like a promise. She was trapped, outplayed, completely and utterly defeated. And she had never been more relieved in her entire life. True partnership isn't about erasing differences or breaking the rules. It's about finding someone clever enough to rewrite the rulebook entirely just to stand by your side. If you love this fast-paced clash of magic, mystery, and romance, subscribe to our channel for more thrilling stories.